Welcome back to Wildcat Science with Mrs. Haugo. We are on the digestive system, Chapter 19, Part 2. Where we left off was the large intestine. So the large intestine begins at the lower right of the abdomen, and as you can see here, it wraps around the small intestine. And it is about 1.5 meters long, so about 4 or 5 feet long. And it is the large intestine because it has a larger diameter than the small intestine. The appendix is found at the bottom of the beginning of the large intestine. So down here, this would be the appendix. And there is a sphincter that allows digested food from the small intestine to enter the large intestine. So there is a sphincter that sends in a little bit of chyme from the small intestine into the large intestine. So the main functions of the large intestine. One of them is to absorb water and electrolytes, and the other major function is to store and eliminate waste. So perhaps you've ever had a virus and you have noticed one of your body's immune system techniques where it just needs to get the virus out of your body so the chyme or the food, undigested food or the feces does not spend much time in the large intestine. It just gets out of there as quick as possible. And you know the watery stool known as diarrhea. And that is what it would look like if it didn't spend as much time in the large intestines. And it is good that it does absorb all that water back, otherwise we would always be dehydrated. Also, bacteria living in your large intestine produce vitamin K and some B vitamins. So those bacteria are essential to our health. So thanks, bacteria. There are cells in the large intestine that secrete mucus to lubricate the feces and help it move along, which is good because there is mostly very weak peristalsis movement that moves the feces along, and it moves very slowly, very sluggishly through your large intestine. An average stay in the large intestine, is about 24 hours. And then at intervals, once or twice a day, involuntary muscles use strong peristalsis movement to move the feces towards the rectum. So I would say 3 times a day to once every 3 days is a normal interval for defecation. It all depends on the person. So the feces is then stored in the rectum until it is eliminated. And the feces being in the rectum stretches the walls of the rectum, and that will stimulate defecation. So more about defecation. So defecation is triggered by stretching of the rectal wall, which is by afferent sensory neurons. If we look at the picture over here, this is the end of the large intestine, and then the rectum here, and these blue lines are afferent sensory neurons. So they are getting sensory information and sending it towards the spinal cord or the brain. So the signal from the spinal cord stimulates contraction of smooth muscle in the rectal wall and relaxation of the internal anal sphincter. So the spinal cord stimulates contraction of the smooth muscle wall here. And then it also tells the internal anal sphincter to relax. So what is this controlled by? Well, that would be the autonomic nervous system and the parasympathetic reflex, which is more of your rest and digest, which is a good thing because it's probably not convenient to defecate if there is a very stressful situation. When it is convenient, this is where you take over voluntarily, and your voluntary motor neurons stimulate relaxation of the external anal sphincter, and the feces leaves the rectum through the anus. So, fun fact about feces, it is about half by weight of bacteria. and then the rest is undigested food. So that is a lot of bacteria in your poop. So we have made it all the way from mouth to anus, and now we're going to talk about the accessory glands. Starting back at the mouth and looking at the tongue. So the tongue is a muscular organ that aids in chewing and swallowing. One thing it will do is it will grip and reposition the food. It also forms a bolus, which is a small portion of food made into a ball mixed with saliva. And it pushes that bolus into the pharynx and starts the involuntary swallowing reflex, which we have talked about before. So during swallowing, the tongue raises to seal the back of the mouth, and then also the uvula goes up to seal off the nasopharynx, and then your epiglottis will tip to seal off the trachea. So that's all part of your involuntary swallowing reflex. The tongue is important for other things. It is essential for talking. And it also has these fun sensory receptors called taste buds, which allow us to taste our food. So here is a tongue, and here is a real picture of taste buds magnified quite a bit. Also in your mouth are your teeth. So adults have 32 teeth, and they are all shaped structure for their function. So incisors are the front two, and those are chisel shaped, and their function is to chop off pieces. Let's say biting into an apple. Going around the mouth, then we have our canines, which are cone shaped, and their function is to tear and pierce food. Let's say like tearing into a bite of steak. Then you have your premolars and your molars. These are also known as bicuspids, and they have broad crowns with cusps, or these little rounded bits, for grinding. So once you take a bite of that apple or that steak, it will go in back to your premolars and molars, where it is ground up on its way to becoming a bolus and being swallowed into the pharynx. So the root of the tooth lives in the socket of the bone of your mandible or of your maxilla. So that is actually implanted into the bone. And within the tooth, so they're not just solid tooth material, there is a soft area, it's a soft pulp of blood vessels and nerves. So if you ever have a cavity or a root canal that gets into those blood vessels and nerves, it will hurt. So around that soft pulp, the tooth is made of a structure called dentin, which is like bone, but not quite. It has less collagen fibers, less connective tissue, and it has more calcium. So it's a calcified tissue, and it's harder than bone. And then that dentin is itself covered with enamel, which is even harder still. It is the hardest thing in the human body. So our third accessory gland in the mouth are the salivary glands. And as a gland, they secrete saliva. So saliva is produced by 3 sets of salivary glands. What is saliva? It contains water, ions, mucus, enzymes, and antibodies. So let's break that down a little bit. One of the enzymes it contains is amylase, and this is an enzyme needed to digest starches into sugars. And we have a fun lab looking at amylase. It also contains antibodies and enzymes that kill bacteria to keep the teeth and mouth clean, which is good because a lot of pathogens enter through your mouth. It also contains bicarbonate, the bicarbonate ion, which is used to buffer acidic drinks and foods so they don't erode your teeth, which is good because a lot of things we eat are acidic, particularly pop. And let's see, teeth start corroding at a pH of 5.5, and I know pop is much more acidic than that. It's a good thing our saliva is there to protect our teeth. It also dissolves food so that it can be tasted, and it helps moisten food to help in the digestion process. So looking at the picture over here, we have 3 sets of salivary glands that are making saliva to help us, probably right now. Moving on to the liver. It is your largest glandular organ in the body. It is a very large organ. It is about 3 pounds, and it also is, among many other things, it is a gland, so it will secrete things. It is located under the diaphragm. The lower edge is level with your ribs, and it has a larger right side. So it produces bile. One of its many functions is to produce bile, and then it sends the bile into the gallbladder to be stored until the bile is secreted into the small intestine. And there's a nice picture on page 439. So what about bile? Bile helps digest fats by emulsifying them. So emulsifying fats, since we know fats are not water soluble, so how do those enzymes get in there and help digest them? Well, they have to be broken apart, and emulsification means that you have smaller balls or droplets of fat so that the enzymes can get at them better. So emulsifying fats breaks them into small droplets so there's more surface area to be digested. So here is another picture of the liver, and as you can see, here is the gallbladder, which would be sending bile to the small intestine. So the liver has many functions besides making bile. One of those is to store glucose as glycogen and release glucose into the blood when needed. So glycogen is a starch. It is a storage form of the sugar glucose. And as we know, the pancreas talks to the liver quite a bit to, if there's too much blood glucose, to store it as glycogen. And then if there's not enough blood glucose, to release it, the glycogen, break it down and release it as blood glucose. Also, the liver will modify and store fats. It stores iron and some other vitamins. It produces proteins, like albumin, which is an important protein in your blood, and clotting factors, which are important in your blood. It is involved in recycling and destroying old erythrocytes. And it makes urea from nitrogenous waste and transports it to the kidneys to be eliminated, which is good because nitrogenous waste would be bad for our body. And it also, above all that, or even in addition to all that, it filters out and detoxifies toxins and wastes, including poisons, drugs, and alcohol. So basically, our liver does many things for us, and it helps keep us alive. You cannot live without your liver, so make sure you take care of your liver. In our next video, we're going to continue on with our accessory organs and then get into some things, what can go wrong with your digestive system. Okay, see you next time.